All right, everybody, welcome. Excited to have you here. Today, we're going to be covering why seeking validation from other people can become a detriment to your mental health and can exacerbate anxiety. So, if you have struggled with anxiety for a long period of time and you find that what triggers you tends to be other people, other people's behavior, other people's emotions, and more importantly, other people's approval or lack thereof of you, then I definitely think you're going to want to tune into this, especially if you feel like you have been seeking ways to improve your mental health by grasping for additional validation and affirmation from external sources. You definitely want to tune into this because I have a very different perspective. Really, I'm a different voice in the mental health industry on this topic, and I think that you're going to want to at least try on our perspective for size because it tends to work incredibly well for our clients. It's worked incredibly well for me. For those of you guys joining live, go ahead and let me know in the comments. Go ahead and put yes if you can hear me and see me. And then I will also answer any questions that are put into the comments. Just go ahead and pop them in right there. I will certainly address them by the end of the live stream, or I can take them as I go. We'll see how things are going. But first thing that I would like to know from those of you guys who are joining us live and asking for anybody who's listening to the replay is, do you find yourself frequently feeling triggered whenever somebody is not accepting of you, or at least it appears that someone is not accepting of you? Can you just let me know in the comments, does that relate to you? Do you have that experience? And maybe you can add even some specifics, like what type of environment or what type of context tends to be triggering for you. For example, does it tend to be just in romantic relationships? Is it with any type of relationship that you have, friendships? Is it, say, with your parents? Is it even with, say, your coworkers, your boss, things of that nature? What tends to trigger that feeling? And how strong of a reaction do you tend to get? Just kind of let me know what your experience is. But this is one of the most common sets of triggers for people, is things like feeling misunderstood, feeling unaccepted, feeling rejected, feeling a sense of disapproval. Okay, these are the common words that people will very often throw out when I'm working with them or consulting with them. And there's something that I realized a long time ago when I first got into the mental health industry. What I realized when I was deciding on whether I wanted to be a traditional therapist or a counselor or whatever it was that I wanted to do, I initially thought that I was going to go down that more traditional path. And I became familiar with what traditional therapy and counseling tends to do, kind of the approach. I studied into that for a while and was deciding on whether I wanted to do it. And what I learned was that one of the big things about their approach is there's a principle in therapy called unconditional positive regard. And unconditional positive regard basically comes from this idea that the patient or the client can basically, say nothing wrong, right? That the therapist is just simply going to hold complete and total positive regard for the individual who's on the other side of the table for them. And from that idea, there's also been a long history for decades of affirmation and validation. And in today's world, I think especially with the rise of the millennial generation, which I'm a part of, there has been an incredible cultural shift where there's been a really, really strong push and a strong value of things like validation and affirmation for how we currently feel. There's kind of this idea that's risen up in the past 15 to 10 years, which has said, my feelings are my feelings. What I feel is true. What I feel is my truth. And that if you challenge what I'm feeling or you disagree with what I'm feeling, you don't care. And that the best way that you can express care for me, or the best way you can express love for me, is to agree with me, to basically assume that what I'm saying is true, to not question it, to support it. And this has been an incredibly strong reaction. And one of the things that this created things that had never existed in the world before, such as like free speech zones on college campuses, because there was this idea that if people were out and proud with their ideas, it could be triggering or offensive. And so we started seeing things happen on public universities where people were getting so offended. There were safe spaces now being created. And it's become a huge cultural phenomenon now where even, say, like in Canada, there are certain words that have been sought to be outlawed and certain legal parameters that have been sought. Like, you can't say this, you have to say this, because otherwise it might offend somebody. So I think that regardless of where you stand on this issue, it's basically empirically true that society has, on the whole, come to value validation and affirmation much larger in the past 10 to 15 years. And there have been some interesting counter opinions to this too. There's been some extreme counter opinions to this too. The people who are like seeking to purposefully offend people to kind of show how ridiculous it is to not want to be offended. Obviously, I don't fall into that camp. But what does this have to do with mental health? What does this have to do with mental health? Well, my forte, as many of you may know if you've been in our community for a while, if you're brand new, welcome. My forte is helping people dramatically reduce or even eliminate anxiety and depression in their life. And we put a huge emphasis, especially on people with anxiety. And one of the big things that causes anxiety is when we expect life to be a certain way that it consistently is not. So very often what I'll teach our clients is that anxiety is nothing more than the state in which your mind is constantly chasing after something that it is having a very difficult or impossible time getting. And there is a short list of those things that the mind can fixate on and obsess over and try to get that are basically impossible to get, or at least consistently. So for example, the two main categories of what causes anxious thoughts are overvaluing certainty is the first one. So when people want to feel in control, they want to feel that things are predictable, they want to feel that there's no surprises, they want to feel that things are all going to go according to how they expect them to go. That creates anxiety because on planet Earth, in case you haven't noticed, there are going to be a whole variety of situations where you will be surprised or things will not go according to plan. This is why there are things like health anxiety. Health anxiety occurs when people want their health to be far more certain and in control than they can reasonably expect it to be. Social anxiety occurs when people want to be far more certain of how the social interaction is going to go than they actually can, because they can't control other people's opinions or behavior, and so on. So a lot of anxiety is triggered because we're craving a higher amount of certainty than we can actually acquire. But the second category that creates a lot of anxious thoughts is when we are overvaluing being good enough. We call this significant. So every human being desires to feel significance in some regard. They want to feel special, unique, good enough. Basically, it comes down to feeling worthy of love. Because the two biggest fears any human being has is, number one, I'm not good enough. And number two, if I'm not good enough, I'm not going to be loved. And so a lot of anxiety revolves around this fear of I'm not good enough. And so if you find yourself getting triggered by being invalidated, or this has been a source of stress for you, then more than likely this has been the big source of anxiety for you, is you frequently feel not good enough. Can you just let me know in the comments, yes or no? Can you relate to that feeling, that frequent feeling getting triggered of, I just don't feel good enough? And what you're seeking is you're seeking other people to validate or affirm you so that way you can feel finally good enough. And when it's not there, it feels like it's kind of like someone poking inside of an open wound, so to speak, right? And that becomes really painful. So now let's talk about how do we look at this differently? Well, the first thing I want to point out right away, which might be counterintuitive for the title of this session here, but I actually do want to validate you slightly and say that, first of all, the desire to feel validated and understood is a basically very common and pretty universal thing. Okay, so I'm not saying that the flat out desire to feel understood and or validated is wrong. Okay, I'm not saying it's wrong. What I'm saying though is unhealthy is not the desire to be validated, but the requirement to be validated. Okay, does that make sense to you? So it makes sense to, just like, for example, like being loved. Everybody desires to be loved, right? People might even desire things like, I don't know, let's say being invited out to lunch or out to dinner, for example. It's okay to desire to be invited out to lunch or to dinner, but to require that you are invited rather than you be the one who initiates contact. Well, now we put ourselves in a precarious position because now you've convinced your brain that it has to have something that is outside of its control. And this is fundamentally why seeking validation is triggering, for two main reasons. Number one, it's outside of your control. If you have any requirements, or the term we use as rules, if you have rules that revolve around other people's behavior, such as, so-and-so needs to agree with me or else I don't feel respected, okay? Or such and such needs to never raise their voice or else I'm going to feel offended. Okay, so if you have rules like that, and by the way, I would bet that you are. If you're listening to a talk like this, I bet you have rules that get violated from time to time. Let me know in the comments what you think some of your rules are. But basically, a rule comes in the format of such and such person, or here, let's put it this way: people need to do X, or else I just flat out cannot stand it. And so that can come in all sorts of different forms. They need to talk to me a certain way. They need to agree with me. They shouldn't challenge me. They shouldn't look at me a certain way. They need to invite me to certain things. Whenever I'm in pain, they ought to reach out. Whenever I'm feeling lonely, they ought to reach out. They should know what I need when I need it before I even ask for it. Okay? These may sound crazy to you as I'm listing these all out, but I guarantee you have several things like this hiding in your subconscious. So a rule is a type of belief about how someone or something should be, okay? And the more rules you have, the harder the game of life becomes, right? Like, there's a reason why checkers is an easier game to play than chess. It's because chess has more rules. So if you have a ton of rules about how people need to validate you and affirm you and treat you and how they can never talk to you, you are creating an environment where you're going to have more anxiety because your rules are going to have a higher likelihood of being violated. The less rules you have, the more inner peace you will have. The more rules you have, the more anxiety you will have, as a general rule. And as another layer to that, the more rules that you have that are outside of your control, the more anxiety you're definitely going to have. As a third layer to that, the more rules that you have that will inevitably be violated, the more anxiety you're going to have, right? So some of you who've been with us for a while may have heard me use this analogy before, but think about like playing a board game. If I've got a board game, think about two different board games. One board game has very few rules. One board game has a ton of rules. Obviously, that second board game is going to be way more difficult to win. It's going to be more anxiety-inducing. The first board game has rules that only require me doing certain things in order for me to win the game. In other words, I can win the game perfectly fine all on my own. I don't need anybody else to do anything else for me. The second game requires other people to do all sorts of stuff in order for me to win. And it doesn't really matter what I do. It matters way more what they do. Could you see how that's going to be more anxiety-inducing? And then as a third layer, the first game, let's say, has no rules that will inevitably be violated. As in, like, it's not a given that the rules are going to be violated some of the time. They may or they may not. In the second game, let's say we've got rules that will inevitably be violated. So, for example, I just did a consultation with someone earlier today, and I asked them, what has to happen in order for you to feel loved? And they said, my partner has to agree with me. And I said, gotcha. What are the chances that your partner is going to have at least some disagreements with you from time to time? They said 100%. I said, gotcha. Does a person disagreeing with you truly, absolutely mean that they don't love you? Or does that just mean they have a different opinion? They have a different walk, they have a different experience. And they finally realized, I shouldn't connect the rule of people have to agree with me with the idea of being loved. So that's the big challenge with seeking validation. It's outside of your control. It's inevitably not going to happen. It's also, by the way, inevitably not going to happen in the way that you would prefer. By the way, I see some great comments. I'm going to take a quick pause. Lizzie, you said, I can't do anything right. If you're open to receiving some coaching, don't ever say that sentence again. Instead, the reality is you're not doing certain things up to the expectations of how you think you should be. Probably like 2 or 3 things, and then you're calling those 2 or 3 things everything. Like, I can't do anything right. Generalizations, like anything, everyone, no one, always, those are the highest anxiety-inducing words in the human language, only next to can't. So if you say, I can't do anything right, that's going to be what we call an incantation. where you're basically convincing yourself that you're less capable than you are. You're basically hypnotizing yourself with that language. So do yourself a favor and never say those words again. Let's see. Lizzie says rules are usually standard. So yeah, we have rules. So you're right, Lizzie. Rules are usually standard. Everybody has a certain set of rules. The difference is that some people have rules about their own mental game of life that rely on their own actions more than other people. Some people have rules that are easier to abide by versus they're constantly being violated. So it's more about the quality and quantity of your rules. That's where all of the difference is made. Brenda says, my assistants and doctors at physical therapy should be kinder about my feelings. They talk about me as if I'm not there, but I can hear them. So I appreciate your rules there. So Brenda, and I'm talking to everyone now, so if I can use your example as a teaching moment here. So Brenda's rule is my assistants and doctors at physical therapy should be kinder about my feelings. They talk about me as if I'm not there, but I can hear them. Now, anybody who would hear Brenda say this, right? And I'm sure all of you guys listening have your own sort of corollary to what Brenda's saying, right? Like a person that you wish would treat you a little differently. Now, here's the thing. Is Brenda being crazy? Is Brenda being like, absurd with her request and her desire, right? No, I don't think so. It seems pretty natural for her to desire people to be kind about her feelings. Even I would say something like that. Like, I want people to be kind about my feelings. Sure. So it's not that she's desiring people to be kind about her feelings that's going to cause her anxiety. What would cause her anxiety is she might be holding on to a belief that says, my doctors and my assistants have to be kinder about my feelings or else I can't stand it. So remember, it's about requiring other people to behave a certain way that's going to create anxiety. So Brenda, what I would encourage you to do is to let go of that rule. And one antidote, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit for you guys, but one way you can work on removing your rules and working on not being triggered when people are out of the scope of validating you, right? Instead of getting triggered by it, the way to not be triggered by it is to say to yourself, people don't have to validate my feelings in order for me to feel how I want to feel. That would be the phrase you want to remember. If someone could put that in the chat, I'd greatly appreciate it. I'll say it again. People don't have to validate my feelings in order for me to feel how I want to feel. Now, you can tweak that language a little bit in all sorts of different ways that make sense for you. So, for example, you could say, I don't need other people to validate my feelings in order for me to validate my feelings. I don't need other people to validate my feelings in order for me to feel good about myself. I don't need other people to express love to me in order for me to be loving to myself. Okay, you see where I'm going with this? What we're doing when we change these rules, when we change these beliefs, is what we're doing, guys, is we're doing a process that we teach our clients called reclaiming your power. If you're anxious frequently, or if you're feeling depressed, it's because you're not feeling powerful. You feel like your power exists outside of you, whether it be other people or past events. So, for example, you might say something like, I was always an outgoing person until I got stood up at prom, and I've never been the same ever since then. If you have a story like that, what you're doing is you're giving your power away to a past event. You're convincing yourself that you have fewer choices than you actually have because of something outside of your control, and that will create anxiety. And validation, as we've been saying, is something that's fundamentally outside of your control, which is one of the big reasons why it is a major problem to be seeking validation. It can cause you challenges, okay? Now, as I said, we all desire it, including myself, but this trend recently has become a big problem, this cultural trend where we are overvaluing validation. That's the big phrase I want you to remember. It's not a problem to desire validation for your feelings, but it can become a problem when you are overvaluing it, okay? So if you put validation way, way, way on the tippy top of your list, that becomes a problem. Because let's say what you want most in the world is validation, and then what you want second to that is to feel loved, and third what you want is to feel happy. A lot of you guys might be able to relate to a value structure like that. And the challenge with that is what we've done is we've put something that's outside of your control that inevitably won't happen all the time. And even when it does happen, even when people are trying to validate you, they may not do it in the very specific way that your rules require them to. So you won't even feel validated even when they're trying to validate you. That's a whole other layer to this that becomes a big problem. So let's say we've got validation number 1, loved number 2, and then joy number third. Well, that's going to become a problem for you, because when you are inevitably not validated, you won't feel loved. When you're not loved, you won't feel joy. Okay? So it's the fact that you've put validation at the top of the list that's become a problem. So when we overvalue it, now it becomes really an issue. And I work with people like this all the time. I consult with them all the time where they have such a knee-jerk reaction to anything where they're invalidated or disagreed with. And it's like, look, you can perpetually wish for the outside world to conform to your every wish and desire and feeling, but that's just not going to happen. Like, it'd basically be like this. You are born into this world, and you have your own little rule book for how life should go. You're playing your own little mental game about how life should go, but no one else on planet Earth has your exact same rules. And the only way that you get to win your version of the game of life is if all of the other players follow your rules, but meanwhile, they don't have a copy of your rules. Could you see how anxiety-inducing that would be? You'd make very few friends, or you would keep very few of them. And many of you guys know what I'm talking about. When you've overvalued validation, you have pushed a lot of people away. And the only people you're going to tend to attract are people who value validation just as much as you do. And so you guys can all get together and validate each other for how you currently feel. And then you'll stunt your growth, because you'll basically just validate each other for how you currently feel, as opposed to challenging each other to expand and to become better people. That's another big challenge with valuing validation, is it incentivizes you to stay put as opposed to grow. And growing is what creates pride. Growing is what creates self-esteem. Growing is what creates joy. Staying stuck and staying still and being reinforced and conditioned for your pain is not helping you. It's not going to help you. So that's yet another problem with validation. It's outside of your control. It relies on other people. You're not going to be able to win the game of life on your own. It inevitably is not going to happen. If you overvalue it, you're going to be triggered all the time. If you overvalue it, you're going to have a small circle of people who think just like you, so your growth will be stunted, and you'll be living in a local reality tunnel where everybody around you thinks very similarly, which is not good for you, okay? Not healthy for you at all. Those are all big problems. It can damage your relationships hugely, because even when people have good intentions and they're trying to love you and validate you, you might have specific rules and you go, no, you didn't validate me. They go, what are you talking about? I'm trying to validate you right now. And you go, no, you didn't do it the way that I want you to do it. And that becomes a big problem. It becomes very triggering. And then the other thing that I really want to segue to, and this is the thing that a lot of people have a tough time hearing sometimes, but I care about you guys too much to lie to you. And I'm always going to tell you the truth. I'm always going to tell you what you need to hear. And I say this from a standpoint of, I'm thinking about myself when I was deeply anxious and deeply depressed and suicidal, and I wish that someone would have come along and told me this. And here's what some of you may need to hear. When you overvalue validation, what you end up training yourself to do is you end up training yourself to get your needs met by being in pain. So many of you have rules such as, if you really love me, you are there for me when I am in pain. If you really love me, you'll nurture me, you'll reach out to me, you'll tend to me when I'm in pain. And the challenge with that is that some of you guys have gotten confused. You've gotten what we call a mixed association or a false association. And what that means is at some point in your life, you were probably in really, really bad pain. And someone might have come along and given you a lot of sympathy. And that sympathy may have felt like love, and it may have felt really, really good. And somewhere, somehow, this happens for a decent portion of people, your brain may have linked up, oh, if I get in pain, people will come and love me. And this is not everybody, okay? And this was, by the way, this was me back then. Like I wasn't trying to do it intentionally. I wasn't trying to manipulate anybody consciously, but subconsciously, I would get in horribly depressed, really, really bad states, and I would hope that people would notice. And then when I became suicidal, I can look back on it now. The way I orchestrated my suicide plan was one in which I knew I was going to get caught, and a lot of people were going to know about it. And I was hoping that people would show me love through giving me attention while I was in pain. The problem with this, with seeking the validation and then offering the validation when people are in pain, is that unless you actually empower people with the tools of transformation also, what it does is it literally conditions and trains the brain to continue to stay in a cycle of pain, because your brain can believe, oh, every time I get in pain, I get love, or at least what appears to be love. Okay, again, that doesn't apply to everybody, but it does apply to most of us, at least at one point or another in our mental health journey. And so the big thing that I have found over the years is that the number one addiction that human beings have is not to drugs or alcohol, but it is to being in pain. There is an urge that people get to cling to their pain, to cling to their problems, and to reopen the wound and go, oh my gosh, hey guys, look how big my wound is. You think your wound is bad? Look how big and bad my wound is. Won't you please come heal it for me? Oh, that feels so good that you're being kind to my wound. People reinforce a pattern like that unknowingly in themselves, and it keeps them stuck, as opposed to incentivizing ourselves to change and transform and grow. And by the way, I want to make something very abundantly clear, because some of you guys might be getting the wrong idea. This does not mean that you are not entitled to feel certain feelings. This does not mean that every negative feeling is a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're not allowed to feel negative feelings. I feel negative feelings from time to time. Okay, I do. And I used to be, when I was a very immature coach, I used to think, oh, you can totally live absolute positivity all the time, always. But the reality is, if you do that, you're never growing, right? A natural thing of growing in your life is you're going to encounter new situations that make you feel fearful or doubtful or a little insecure from time to time. And the challenge we have as human beings is to grow through those moments. Okay, and not allow them to be cyclical, not allow them to repeat themselves over and over and over to the point we get stuck. Okay, this is why I say that lowercase a anxiety is fine. Uppercase A anxiety is what you want to avoid. So you can feel pain. You're allowed to feel pain. You're allowed to express it, okay? But there's a difference between expressing pain, in which you feel it, it wells up in you, you express it, oh my gosh, wow, I feel so much better, and you redirect yourself. There's a difference between that, which is a healthy way to process your emotions, versus what we call indulging in pain. And indulging in pain is when you feel the pain and you get some of your needs met by feeling the pain. And by feeling the pain, you are able to hide from life in some way. It becomes sort of like a cocoon. You get to insulate yourself. You get to feel safe. You get to stay in your pain and excuse yourself from taking responsibility in your life. And you get to excuse yourself from taking responsibility and growing. That is unhealthy. And that is the pattern that has to stop if that's going on in your life right now. And it's important to understand the difference. So there's a difference between, here's 3 ways to process emotions. Let me just point these out to you guys real quick right now, some little bonus material for you. Number 1 way that you can do it is through repression. Totally unhealthy. Okay, I used to do this for a long time. Repression is, oh my gosh, I'm feeling something. No, I'm not. Nope, I'm not. I'm not feeling anything. I'm going to ignore that. Nope, I'm not feeling anything. That's repression. Repression is not helpful because it's like having a pebble in your shoe and you just tell yourself that the pebble is not in your shoe. You keep walking or running until your feet are bleeding. Okay, it's not healthy, not helpful. If you have a feeling of pain coming up, you must acknowledge it. You must express it. And more importantly, you need tools to process it and to use that feeling to grow and to expand and to become a better person, which is option number 2, which is the feeling comes up, you acknowledge it, you express it, and then if it's showing up as a pattern, right? Like, oh my gosh, I keep getting nervous every single time I public speak in my office, right? Like if you get a little nervous when you're about to public speak for the first time, that's okay. Acknowledge it. You could even say to somebody like, yeah, I'm a little nervous, right? You could express it. And then, you can use that to your advantage. You can express it, acknowledge it, and move forward. right? That's okay. If it becomes a pattern, however, like, oh my gosh, I've gotten nervous every single time I'm talking in front of this group, now you have a pattern that needs to get dealt with. You got to find tools. You need to get some help. It needs to be addressed one way or the other, okay? But that's the expression. And then the final one is indulgence. Indulgence is, I'm feeling what I'm feeling, and if you tell me I need to change, you tell me I need to grow, you're a piece of shit. You're an asshole. You need to just validate me for what I'm feeling. And you shouldn't try to help me change what I'm feeling, even if I'm feeling it for 10 years, even if I've been feeling depressed to the point that I'm not taking responsibility and growing and getting help. Okay, that is not healthy. That's not helpful. It's like the difference between eating a little bit of ice cream, right? Yeah, that's entertainment. That's cool. Treat yourself, no problem, versus eating a gallon of ice cream. That is indulgence. That's not healthy. And it's important to understand the difference. Okay, those are the three. Now, I said a second ago, if you indulge in the pain and you're seeking validation by indulging in the pain, it's meeting some of your needs. Some of you might have a question of, okay, well, what kind of needs are we talking about? How do you know if you're actually indulging in the pain and you're seeking validation too much? Well, let me quickly remind those of you guys who are familiar with us, and those of you guys who are new, this will be brand new to you, but one of the things that we teach our clients are what we call the 6 human needs. So everything we do as human beings goes back to these 6 needs. Anything you're doing in your life, you're doing to try to meet one or more of these 6 needs. And you can meet these needs in healthy ways or unhealthy ways. And very often when we're looking for validation, it becomes unhealthy. Not always, but sometimes it becomes unhealthy. So the first need that we all have is for certainty and comfort, for a baseline level of feeling like we have control and continuity in our life. Right? And so staying in your pain is a way to stay comfortable. It is a way to avoid uncertain situations in your life. It is a way to prolong the feeling of certainty. Many of you guys are going into your pain because it's what you know, it's what you're used to, it's what you're certain about. And that is what I mean by our pain meeting our needs. That is not healthy. It's not helpful. The second need we have is for variety. It is for, ironically, uncertainty. It's for change, for stimulus. So healthy ways you can get variety are like reading a book, having a conversation, watching a movie, learning a skill, going outside, exercising, doing anything that changes your state of mind. But we can also sink into our patterns and our problems as ways to get our needs for variety met. Especially any of you guys who've ever been diagnosed bipolar, reason why that's happening is your nervous system is getting its need for variety met by switching back and forth from a high energy state to a low energy state. And your pattern is meeting your needs of your nervous system. Okay, which has got to be broken. The third need that we all have is to feel significant or good enough, basically to feel worthy, to feel unique, special, different. Okay, and there's lots of empowering ways you can get that need met. You could be significant by volunteering for a charity, or being an excellent parent, or doing something surprising and unique for your spouse, or working really hard at your job, or developing incredible fitness and feeling significant about that. So there's empowering ways you can do that, but there's disempowering ways you can get your need for significance met, such as having the biggest, loudest problem in the room and seeking validation for it. There are people who are addicted to their problems because it's a way for them to maintain certainty. It's something they're certain about, and they get to avoid the uncertain growth of challenging the problem. It creates a variety. It creates a state change in their nervous system, and it makes them feel significant. They feel like, oh, I don't just have a tiny little problem. I have a big, significant problem. I've been depressed for 20 years. I was diagnosed with this and this and this, okay? And by the way, I'm not judging you. I was once doing all these things and saying all these things. I'm pointing this out to you. Because if you're using your pain as a way to get your needs met, what I want you to understand is you have an addiction. You have an addiction to getting into pain and getting your needs met. And you must shift that addiction, or else you're going to be stuck permanently. Okay. The fourth need we have is for connection and love. Now, again, there's lots of empowering ways to do that. You could go give someone a hug, go on a date, get someone roses, write somebody a nice note. All sorts of ways you could do that in empowering ways. But there's disempowering ways to get connection and love too. Like let's go get wasted and drink a bunch of alcohol and connect with our friends. Or let's Let's get in arguments with strangers on Facebook comment threads, right? That is ironically a way to connect with other people. Or let's go ahead and binge watch television and connect with the characters. Or let's go ahead and sink into our problems and then seek to get connection with other people for our problems. Some of you guys have gotten yourself trained that the only way you know how to connect with other people is through your problems. And that is when you've got validation that's unhealthy. Okay. The fifth need is the need for growth. Some of you guys use your pain and your problems as a way to grow, ironically. Like, oh yeah, I've had anxiety for this long. I've read this book and that book and did this class and this course. And I talk to people about it all the time and I'm on message boards. And you actually feel like you're growing as an individual by holding on to your pain. Okay, not very healthy, unfortunately. And then the sixth and final need is the need to contribute. And this can be a big thing too. Like, oh yeah, I'm always messaging people and I'm trying to talk about anxiety and depression and I post this comment and this thing. And by the way, there is a good intention behind that. But I want you to understand that many of you have begun to revolve your entire identity around being anxious. And it's because being anxious meets these 6 needs. And that is an addiction. Okay, people who don't have anxiety have positive addictions to other things. They get their needs met by putting their mental and emotional energy behind other things. And that's the truth of the matter. So if we want to make sure you can live a life without anxiety, we have to break your addiction to anxiety being a dominant way you get those needs met, or being the way in which you learn to connect with other people and get validated. And we have to find new ways of connecting with other people, growing, contributing, feeling variety, feeling comfort, and feeling significant that don't revolve around being broken. That's a really, really important thing to understand. And no one teaches that except me. But the reason I teach it is because I lived it. I mean, I lived in that state where I was using my problems as a way to get my needs met, and that becomes what we call a safe problem, right? A safe problem is a problem that you focus on a lot, you spend a lot of energy thinking about it, but it doesn't cause you to grow. And anxiety is a safe problem versus the types of problems that we call quality problems. Quality problems are the types of problems that cause you to grow, that cause you to expand. And that's where we got to put your energy, such as expanding your career, becoming an excellent father or mother, deepening your relationship with your partner, healing the wounds in your family systems, elevating your physical fitness and health, taking control of your financial responsibility. Those are quality problems. And we very often put our mental energy behind safe problems because they meet our needs and because we're scared shitless of tackling the quality problems. But the more you do that, the more you stay stuck. Okay, it's not good. All right, I went on a couple tangents there. Let me get back to my notes. Okay, hopefully, by the way, can you guys let me know, is this valuable? Is this sparking anything for you? Okay, the next thing I want you to understand is that there was many years ago, probably about 25, 30 years ago, there was a dominant attitude, which was the suck it up attitude. Okay, and that suck it up attitude, I want to be very clear, is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying if you're feeling pain, hey, suck it up, because that's not very helpful. That's like a form of repression. That's why we had a whole generation called the millennials, my generation, which responded to the Generation X suck it up attitude and said, no, what are you talking about? That's not very nice. That's not very kind. I need to be validated instead. And on the surface, that sounds good. It sounds better. But again, valuing validation versus overvaluing validation becomes the problem. If you've got a board game that has 5 different goals that you have to accomplish, I always use the example of Monopoly. You got to get a little bit of money, then you buy some property, then you get a Monopoly, then you charge everyone rent, then your family disowns you, and you win. Okay, that's how you win Monopoly. If you don't ever get any money at all for passing go and collecting $200, there is no chance you can win Monopoly. So if you've put validation at the top of your list, and below that are things like peace of mind and joy and love and respected, chances are you go off the hinges when you're not feeling validated because you may have overvaluated it and you never are able to get out of the gates. And that's a big problem. Okay, so we want to be careful with that. All right. Let's see. Terry says, value in what I'm hearing. I want to change. I take this seriously. By the way, Terry, you're using what we call a trigger word. It's a very good trigger word, which is the word seriously. So for example, if you start saying to yourself, up until now, I have not taken my anxiety recovery seriously, but now I am going to take it seriously, you're going to start seeing changes happening very quickly. Same thing with your physical health. A lot of times we like to create excuses for ourselves of, oh yeah, this happened and COVID and 10 years ago I did this and my dad was an asshole and blah, 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 and that's why I've got anxiety. Bullshit. What you've got to do is instead say, you know what? I'm really not taking my anxiety recovery seriously. I'm dabbling in it. And I've gotten some good results by dabbling in it, but if I'm really serious about this, then I'm going to find a way to handle it. So that's a really good word for you to keep using. Lizzie is saying, it's deepening my feelings of inadequacy, bringing too much to the surface. So Lizzie, here's my sincere thing that I'm going to encourage you to take a look at. You're slipping into the very phenomenon that I'm describing, right? Putting that sort of feeling out there. I appreciate you being honest. And I want to acknowledge you for that. It takes some courage to be honest. But what we've got to do is we have to help you do what every person who's serious about living a life without anxiety and without depression has to do, which is you've got to learn to play the game of life from the inside out, not the outside in. And that's why validation is such an issue. If you go through life where the only way we can ever feel good about ourselves is if this person talks to me this way and this thing goes this way and my boss talks to me this way and my employment situation is like this and the people on the news are like this and this person that I prefer is president, the more rules we put on how other people have to be for us to feel peace of mind, the more out of control you're going to be. So my sincere suggestion to you is, if you're really serious about getting the mental health you deserve, is to take an inventory of what all of the rules are that you have that get triggered regularly and ask yourself, which one of these do I really need to learn to let go of? Because the only reason you're feeling inadequate is you have a lot of rules that have to be met in order for you to give yourself permission to feel adequate. So that's really what's got to happen. Brenda says, yes, helpful. Please differentiate what you're saying versus 12-step meetings where you listen to people whining how to elevate. So, in a 12-step, I have a lot of critiques on the 12-step system, but at the same time, I'm a fan of anything that does work. So for those people who have found the 12-step system to work for them, great, go ahead and do that. Just like talk therapy, right? I'm not fully 100% against talk therapy, because talk therapy does work for a select set of the population. The reason I am passionate about teaching what I teach and what I do is because it tends to work for a wider range of people. And so that's my first big thing I would say. The challenge with a 12-step meeting, I believe, is there is a lot of validation rather than transformation. So for example, the number one sentence that everyone says in a 12-step meeting is, hi, my name is Ty, and I'm an alcoholic. I have a big problem with that because saying I am an alcoholic or I am an addict is taking a pattern, okay, and turning it into a personality. That's like someone saying, I am a perfectionist, rather than them telling the truth, which is, no, you currently have a pattern of seeking perfection. When we define our problem in unsolvable terms, it's no question as to why we end up getting stuck. If I tell myself I am an addict for 30 years, no wonder I keep going back to alcohol, for example, right? Now, at the same time, the reason why they do that, the motivation behind the 12-step program doing that, is because you can't solve a problem until you acknowledge that you have a problem. And so saying I am an addict is an acknowledgement of the problem. It's just a distortion of the problem where we take it from being a pattern and we turn it into who the person is. This is why, by the way, I'm fundamentally against people getting diagnoses like I have generalized anxiety disorder. Because when you get a diagnosis like that, you now have shifted and changed your entire way of looking at yourself, and you start to expect to be anxious, which is the very thing that causes anxiety. rather than diagnosing the pattern is what we really should do. So when I work with clients, I always tell them, I don't give a shit what diagnosis you got in the past because it has no determination on your future. What I care about is let's break down the pattern that's in the way that's making you feel stuck. I've helped people get over alcoholism dozens and dozens of times. I helped a gentleman quit a hardcore methamphetamine addiction and alcoholism in 7 weeks, where he had been in and out of rehab 6 times. And one of the big things I did with him is I said, don't ever tell yourself you are an addict ever again, because that takes your behavior of the past and it causes you to own it in the present. Instead, what you want to say is, up until now, I have had a pattern of addiction. Okay? And so we changed his language. When you change your language, you change how you feel. When you change how you feel, you change how you act. When you change how you act, you change your identity. Okay, so that's a big challenge I have with 12-step. The other challenge I have with 12-step is that it's a lot of, hey, let's all get in this group, let's all talk about our issues over and over and over again, and in essence, let's validate each other for those issues. There is, however, some acknowledgement of progress, especially by the leaders and the counselors. So there is some, good things there. And again, I'm not trying to shit on 12-step programs, but there are some challenges with it because it does tend to reinforce patterns rather than reinforcing transformation. Okay, so getting to the end here of the key content, let me wrap all of this up strong for you guys real quick. I want you to understand this. We all have to make a choice between what we value more. Do we value validation more, or do we value transformation more? And that's what I really want to ask you. I want you to be very honest with yourself, please, because you cannot solve a problem until you acknowledge the problem. And there's no harm in just acknowledging the problem. Up until now, have you valued seeking validation for your pain more than you have sought information and actions that lead to transformation? Which one have you valued more up until now? That's the first question I want you to sincerely answer for yourself. There's no wrong answer, just be honest. And then the second question is, if you've been valuing validation more than transformation, how has that been working out for you? Okay, and I'm asking you like a big brother would when he sees that you're doing something that's causing you pain. How is it working out for you? And are you content with that? Are you content with another, however long you've been struggling, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Are you content with valuing validation more than doing what is required to transform? Right? Now, they aren't totally mutually exclusive, as I've said. But when you're valuing validation more than transformation, that's when you're going to get stuck. Okay? And what I got 2 final points for you, and that is that, number one, we all must learn to be our own source of validation rather than expecting or requiring it from others. So there's a key phrase that I teach my clients that tends to work really well as a shortcut to help them start to rewire themselves on this. And it is, I don't need X in order to love myself. Okay, now you can change the love myself like into believe in myself or feel self-confident or whatever. But I don't need my dad's approval in order to be kind to myself. For example, I don't need my wife to not raise her voice in order for me to feel good about myself. I don't need my boss to be in a good mood all the time in order for me to do a good job at work. You see how powerful that is? So when you start to use this kind of belief system, what you're able to do is let go of your rules, create a much greater sense of flexibility, and you become the one in charge, which is what's required to get rid of anxiety. Okay, and then the final point I have for you is that the only law of mental health mastery is you must do what truly empowers you in the long run. So for example, if we take like physical health, for example, everybody's a little bit different. Okay, so for some people, losing weight, getting fit is a little more challenging than other people. I acknowledge that. Not everybody's exactly the same. However, there are laws. There are laws of what creates physical well-being and what creates breakdown of physical well-being. If you follow the laws the majority of the time, right? You eat right most of the time. You exercise most of the time. You don't drink alcohol in excess most of the time. You don't use like marijuana or nicotine in excess most of the time, or whatever it is for you, right? If you don't do the bad thing the majority of the time, then you'll get certain benefits. You'll get certain positive consequences. Those are just laws of how it works. So there's nothing wrong with saying, I am okay with my physical health being a certain level, and I'm okay with my habits creating my physical health at that level. But if you're dissatisfied, there are certain laws that may not be in alignment with your current behaviors. You have to live in alignment with those laws, at least most of the time. You can have a cheat day, you can have dessert, you can have a little candy, or whatever it is that you need. But if you do that most of the time, there will be consequences. And it's the same way with mental health. There are actions and habits and behaviors that have consequences. If your mental health is not where you want it to be, it is not because you were born that way. It is not because you're genetically predetermined to be that way. It is not because your mother treated you a certain way or your father treated you a certain way. It's not any of those things. What it is that right now your mind has a certain set of patterns. It has a certain set of habits. You have a certain way of focusing on things. You have a certain set of things you tell to yourself. You have a certain set of things that you do. And those inputs create certain outputs. And one of those inputs is what you are deciding is most important to you, which is what we call your values. And so if you overvalue certainty, you're going to have anxiety. If you overvalue trying to feel good enough, you're going to have anxiety. If you overvalue other people's opinions more than your own, you're going to have anxiety. So these are the laws of the mind. And don't for a minute tell yourself that you're destined to have anxiety for the rest of your life. It's just not flat out possible. I came from 3 generations of mental health issues. 3. Okay? They were all around me. I grew up in an environment, a childhood that absolutely did not support strong mental health. There was no positive role model or example of strong mental health mastery for me. None of that. It just did not exist. I had anxiety and depression for years. I was medicated, hospitalized, put into therapy. I went through the whole gamut. I was told you have a disorder, you're going to have this for the rest of your life. But I was not willing to accept that. And what I did was I got very, very committed to learning every single technique and skill I could possibly get my hands on, and I experimented with all of them. Most of them were bullshit, but I found the ones that eventually worked because I was not willing to tolerate a life with anxiety and depression. And if you want to, this is where there's 2 groups of people. There's the type of people that have anxiety. They're committed to living in the anxiety identity. They're really only interested in coping. They really, they're so committed to the idea of, no, I'm going to have anxiety for the rest of my life. And, maybe I can just do a couple breathing exercises, or I can do this or that, or I'll watch a video to get a little tip. And those people, I wish you the best of luck, but you're going to be stuck permanently, until you shift into being the second type of person. And the second type of person is the type of person who says, all right, even if my dad was an asshole, even if my mom was an alcoholic, even if I had this trauma, even if blah, 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 I am the one in charge now. I'm taking the power back now. I'm going to learn how to work my mind the way it needs to be worked. I'm going to retrain myself to think how I need to think and feel how I want to feel and act how I want to act. It's up to me. No one's going to come and rescue me. Okay? That is required for you to have the mental health that you want. And I'm being so raw and direct with you guys because I want you to know the truth, and this is the fucking truth. Unless you take full responsibility and say, I refuse to live a life of anxiety. I refuse to let my self-worth be determined by whether other people validate me or not. Unless you pull that power back, you're going to feel powerless indefinitely. All right, so thank you guys for showing up. I really appreciate it. By the way, we are about to close applications for our client program. We have 4 spots left. We are closing applications on Monday. If you would like some individual one-on-one help to get your anxiety reduced a minimum of 75% in the next 90 days, or I continue to work with you for free one-on-one until you do, just go ahead and put the word apply in the comments. Or if you're watching the replay, just go ahead and go to mentalhealthcoaching.com and submit your application before Monday. But thanks for joining, guys. I'll see you guys next week. See ya. Bye.